Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth in the world's best books. I'm your host, Erik Rostad, coming to you from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 52 books per year and share what I'm learning. I'll talk a bit about each book, tie ideas together from a variety of genres, and share the one thing I always hope to remember from each book. Today I'm going to cover The Theory of Moral Sentiments by Adam Smith. This was book 40 for my 2021 reading list. Well, I started noticing something in this book, and it's that it describes people as they are. It's like a collection of unwritten laws, unwritten rules of how people actually behave. Not how they want to behave or how they want to appear to behave, but how they actually behave. And what's funny is that I'd never really thought about that before. It's like when you travel outside of the United States or from wherever you're from, and you're part of another culture for a period of time. You get to know your own culture in a unique way, like almost more than living within the culture, because you're just a part of it, and until you see it from the outside, you don't really see it. And it was that way with this book. It's like until you step outside of yourself and read about how people actually are. At least for me, I never had taken the time to just think about that. And it was almost as if you're becoming an impartial spectator of mankind, which is really funny because the impartial spectator is a big part of this book. I'll get into that in the next segment. But in a way, you're almost taking a step out of mankind and looking from the outside at how they actually behave. It was a highly enjoyable experience, which surprised me because 5 years ago, this is the type of book that I just would not have really desired to read. Or understood it, or even wanted to read it, but this time I read through and I really enjoyed it. So I don't recall the last time I've ever used the word sentiments, and probably never have. So it's not a word that we commonly use, but it has more of our sense of feeling. So the theory of moral feelings. And why that's important in this book is that Adam Smith says that our first perception of right and wrong comes from these sentiments and these feelings. We sense them first, and that's contrasted from reason, which becomes the source of general rules of morality. So Adam Smith contrasts this sense and these feelings of right and wrong with reason, and we don't come to it first through reason, he says. This is a book about the virtues. It's a book about the passions, what we approve of, what we disapprove of, happiness, justice, the impartial spectator. It covers a wide variety of topics, but really down to that, how people actually behave. It was written 262 years ago. It was written in 1759, and Adam Smith was a Scottish man. If you go to Edinburgh and you're on the Royal Mile, which is the mile between the palace and the castle, you will see a statue of Adam Smith, and it's right across the street from a statue of David Hume. The two of them were friends, and Adam Smith actually just thought the world of David Hume. And so it's interesting to read both of them together. So I'm reading a book by David Hume as well right now, and it's just neat to see some connection points and just to know that the two of them were friends is pretty neat. As for stats, this book took me 15 hours and 7 minutes to read. I read it between November 15th and the 22nd of this year. So that was 8 days. It broke down to 43 pages per day. It's a 342-page book. And I like sharing that just so you kind of have an idea of how long it might take you to read it. In the next segment, I'll talk about some of the main ideas in the book that stuck out to me. And then in the final segment, I'll cover my one key takeaway from the theory of moral sentiments. Now on to some of the main ideas that stuck out to me in the theory of moral sentiments. And I have to start off with this one. It's the impartial spectator. This is an idea that shows up throughout the book, one of the main ideas. And the idea is this. Adam Smith talks about an impartial spectator viewing what you are doing. What would they say? How would they think of what you're doing, how you're living, your virtues, your vices, your thoughts? If somebody were watching from the outside, how would they view what you're doing? it kind of sets up a mirror to view ourselves through the eyes of another. And how I started off the episode with that idea of traveling to another country and that allowing you to look at your own country, your own culture with a new set of eyes, almost looking at it from the outside. So impartial spectators throughout the book, what actually helped me to understand it even more is when Smith talked about the opposite, in that of the partial spectator. So I want to read a section here about the partial spectator, and I think this will help us go deeper into that idea of what the impartial spectator actually is. So here we go. When two nations are at variance, the citizen of each pays little regard to the sentiments which foreign nations may entertain concerning his conduct. His whole ambition is to obtain the approbation, so the approval, of his own fellow citizens. And as they are all animated by the same hostile passions which animate himself, he can never please them so much as by enraging and offending their enemies. The partial spectator is at hand. Truth and fair dealing are almost totally disregarded. Treaties are violated, and the violation, if some advantage is gained by it, sheds scarce any dishonor upon the violator. End quote. So you see, the partial spectator does very well in wartime because everyone is kind of moving in the same direction that is part of a nation. They are going against the enemy. So anything you say against the enemy is true, and there's no room for the impartial spectator. The first part of that paragraph, he actually talks about neutral nations, and neutral nations can almost fit that idea of being an impartial spectator. But nations who are at war with one another, there is no room for impartiality there. Everything is going to be partial, and the more you can fit along with everyone else and not view things impartially, the better. So I loved that. I loved looking at it the opposite way. I find when authors do that, it really helps you to understand the concept at a much deeper level. Smith also talks about the development of the impartial spectator, and the requirement of that development is being in the presence of real spectators, which leads to the next big idea in the book, and that is of adversity and sorrow and how it can be flattened. So if you're going through a tremendous period of suffering or sorrow or adversity, getting back in society can actually be a big help. So Adam Smith calls it flattening. So you're flattened to flatten these deep sorrows. So here's a section. Are you in adversity? Do not mourn in the darkness of solitude. Do not regulate your sorrow according to the indulgent sympathy of your intimate friends. Return as soon as possible to the daylight of the world and of society. Live with strangers, with those who know nothing or care nothing about your misfortune. Do not even shun the company of enemies, but give yourself the pleasure of mortifying their malignant joy by making them feel how little you are affected by your calamity and how much you are above it. End quote. He also says this: the mind, therefore, is rarely so disturbed, but that the company of a friend will restore it to some degree of tranquility and sedateness. End quote. And the last one here: society and conversation are the most powerful remedy for restoring mind to tranquility. End quote. I love that section. He talks about that throughout the book as well. And just this idea of kind of flattening that, not to get rid of the sorrow or the pain. Those are real emotions, but the best way to move forward is to get around other people who are not having that same level of sorrow, to realize that life moves on, and it acts as a flattening or a kind of a balancing of your emotions. And so the worst thing you can do is just stay by yourself, be alone in this sorrow, depression, adversity, whatever. The best thing you can do is get back into society, into community. Next big idea that stuck out to me, and if you listen to my episodes about Robert Caro, the LBJ series that he did had such a strong impact on me this year. And so I came across this section in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, and I just have to read it because it's like it was written about LBJ himself. 262 years before now, 200 plus before LBJ became president. So let me read this section. This is just incredible. To attain to this envied situation, the candidates for fortune too frequently abandoned the paths of virtue. For unhappily, the road which leads to the one and that which leads to the other lie sometimes in the very opposite directions. But the ambitious man flatters himself that in the splendid situation in which he advances, he will have so many means of commanding the respect and admiration of mankind, and will be enabled to act with such superior propriety and grace, that the luster of his future conduct will entirely cover or efface the foulness of the steps by which he arrived at that elevation. In many governments, the candidates for the highest stations are above the law, and if they can attain the object of their ambition, they have no fear of being called to account for the means by which they acquired it. They often endeavor, therefore, not only by fraud and falsehood, the ordinary and vulgar arts of intrigue and cabal, but sometimes by the perpetration of the most enormous crimes, by murder, by assassination, by rebellion and civil war, to supplant and destroy those who oppose or stand in the way of their greatness. They more frequently miscarry than succeed, and commonly gain nothing but the disgraceful punishment which is due to their crimes. But though they should be so lucky as to attain that wished-for greatness, they are always most miserably disappointed in the happiness which they expect to enjoy in it. It is not ease or pleasure, but always honor of one kind or another, though frequently an honor very ill understood, that the ambitious man really pursues." End quote. I mean, this could be in a Robert Caro book, and you would just think that it was a normal part of the book talking about LBJ. You've got the means versus the ends. You've got by any means necessary to get to the desired goal, but with this idea that once you get to that goal, all the good you do will just kind of erase what it took to get to where you were. Now, I'm reading this book along with three others. So there's 4 books total. I covered the first book in the last episode, Dangerous Liaisons. And then there is The Theory of Moral Sentiments. There is essays by David Hume. And then there's The Fable of the Bees. And so all of these books relate in some way to moral philosophy, the virtues, the vices. It's been really interesting. I've read a part of each of them so far. I'm trying to make my way through The Fable of the Bees right now. And what's really fascinating with The Fable of the Bees is that it was written 45 years before The Theory of Moral Sentiments. The author was Bernard Vandeville. And as I'm reading through that, I am seeing so many ideas that are in The Theory of Moral Sentiments written about in The Fable of the Bees. And they're actually ideas that I thought originated with Adam Smith or were most popular by Adam Smith. And maybe they are, but here are the ideas showing up 45 years before Adam Smith wrote about them. And they're showing up in Mandeville's work. I mean, he even talks about the Impartial Spectator. There were a lot of instances, and it just amazed me as I'm continuing to go through The Fable of the Bees, just to see those ideas. But I guess it's cool too to see the influence of Mandeville. I mean, in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, Smith mentions Fable of the Bees. So, and he kind of dogs it in the part, but yeah, just to see the influence of Fable of the Bees on this book by Adam Smith was quite interesting. And then I also want to connect it to Dangerous Liaisons, as that's the book that I talked about last week. There were a few quotes in this book that just hit right on Dangerous Liaisons. So if you want to listen to that episode to kind of get a background of what that book's about, here are some quotes that related quite closely. So the first is this: "What character is so detestable as that of one who takes pleasure to sow dissension among friends, and to turn their most tender love into mortal hatred? What character is so detestable as that of one who takes pleasure in sowing dissension among friends, and to turn their most tender love into mortal hatred?" End quote. There's a character in Dangerous Liaisons who does that. It's her role, really. That's what she does. She takes pleasure in sowing dissension among friends, and then turning tender love into mortal hatred. And that's what she does throughout the book. And Adam Smith says that character is so detestable. There's a quote in Dangerous Liaison, the Presidente woman, she says this when she's being seduced by Valmont. She says, "If keener pleasures than these exist, I do not desire them. Can there be a sweeter pleasure than to be at peace with oneself?" End quote. Adam Smith says this, a very similar sentiment. "What can be added to the happiness of the man who is in health, who is out of debt, and has a clear conscience?" End quote. And one last quote along these lines. "Neither is it always certain that in the splendid situation which we aim at, those real and satisfactory pleasures can be enjoyed with the same security as in the humble one which we are so eager to abandon." End quote. Throughout Dangerous Liaisons, there's you see the temptation in some of the younger characters of, is there a greater pleasure? Is there something beyond what I've experienced, and just that temptation, and people ready to move you along that temptation. I thought this Adam Smith quote really captured that well. Now into segment 3, and the one thing, my one key takeaway from the theory of moral sentiments. There's a pretty famous quote from this book, and it goes like this: "Man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely." End quote. Adam Smith talks about this in a number of places throughout the book, and he'll use different terms. So in one part he'll say humankind wants to be both respected and to be respectable, or to be praised but also to be praiseworthy. And so the idea is that there's an outward and inward aspect of this. And so the outward, if you're being praised for something, you want to actually be worthy of that praise. And the praiseworthiness deals with the inner side of things. So he talks about our satisfaction being incomplete if we're praised about something that we know is not true about us. And so in that situation, the person is actually praising someone else. They're not praising us, because that's not how we are, even if that's how we appear to be. And so it's this idea that if you're just looking at virtues and vices, virtues can be faked. Virtues, what may appear to be a virtue, if you're the impartial spectator and you're looking at it from the outside, but you actually know what is going on the inside of things, it may not be as praiseworthy, because the thing that may look like virtue is actually something else going on to make it appear as virtue when it's nothing of the sort. And so it's a deep look into the inner life. It's the things that cannot be seen. It's those small decisions that we make on a daily basis. And those are the things that make us praiseworthy or lovely, and not just loved by others on the outside, but loved in on that inside part of it, that inner life. Adam Smith says, in order to attain this satisfaction, we must become the impartial spectators of our own character and conduct. That's what Adam Smith says that needs to take place, and it ties in that idea of the impartial spectator, but not just for the outward things of our lives, but for those inner things, and those being perhaps even more important, those small decisions, the seemingly insignificant decisions being those that are important. So I liked that. I've heard that quote a lot, but it didn't really click until I read the book and kind of saw the different things too of respectable and respected, of praiseworthy and praised, lovely and loved, and what it means to be both. I want to close out with a few final thoughts here. One is if you're interested in this book, I recommend reading this book. I also recommend a book by Russ Roberts. It's called How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life. And it's a quick read, but it is a book that goes through the theory of moral sentiments and highlights some of the main points. I've read it twice. I read it this year and read it for this project. So if you can actually go back and listen to the episode about Russ Roberts, and I talk about some things that really stuck out to me about from How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life. Adam Smith's really known for his book Wealth of Nations, but this book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he wrote this before Wealth of Nations, and it's really neat. It's more on the philosophy side, whereas Wealth of Nations is more on the economic side. But really interesting book, and so if you have a desire to read The Theory of Moral Sentiments, I found that How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life really helped me navigate once I got to the actual book. Also, I like reading books through the lens of the Bible, and what's neat about this book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, is you're looking at how humankind actually behaves. And as I mentioned before, I just hadn't thought about it in that way. And one thing it helped in that sense of connecting it to the Bible is just this is how humankind acts. This is how they are. This is not the utopia book where this is how you hope people are. This is not we're hoping people act in a virtuous way and all that. This is how people are. And so when you read what Jesus calls his disciples to do, you see how at odds that is with how mankind normally is, just in their natural, like viewing from the outside in humankind in their natural habitat. You see it how at odds a lot of what Jesus called his disciples to do it is to how we just naturally behave. And then also just throughout all the other stories in the Bible, you just see how what people did was outside of that norm of the natural habitat idea as well. And so I guess it just kind of helped those stories stick out in how unique they are. I want to close out here with reading a section about universal happiness. So here we go. The administration of the great system of the universe, however, the care of the universal happiness of all rational and sensible beings is the business of God and not of man. To man is allotted a much humbler department, but one much more suitable to the weakness of his powers and to the narrowness of his comprehension. That is the care of his own happiness, of that of his family, his friends, his country. That he is occupied in contemplating the more sublime can never be an excuse for his neglecting the more humble department. And then later on in that paragraph, he says this: the most sublime speculation of the contemplative philosopher can scarce compensate the neglect of the smallest active duty. End quote. So I love that. He's talking about universal happiness. That is under the business of God and not of man. What is our business? It is to care for our own happiness, for that of our family, our friends, and in our country. And I just love that. I mean, you come across when people are talking about what we can do for universal happiness. Well, just beware that's not our department. And if you're talking about these philosophical ideas and you're not taking care of the small action right in front of you, there's a problem. I loved that. So to recap, Theory of Moral Sentiments, The Impartial Spectator, man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely. Great book. A lot of really neat ideas. And it's fascinating to read this book along with those three others as part of this kind of deep dive into moral philosophy and literature about moral philosophy. And it's been a lot of fun. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear from you, especially if you read The Theory of Moral Sentiments. I'd love to hear what you thought about it. Perhaps share something that stuck out to you that I missed in this episode, something that has affected you. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter, and the website is also stocked full of resources to help you find the best books and to create your own reading list. I now have my 2022 spreadsheets up on the website site. So you can go to booksofTitans.com, and right on the homepage there, if you want to download an Excel file or an Apple Numbers file, it's right there. Just click the link and you'll download it right to your computer. This is the spreadsheet that I use on a yearly basis. I put in the books I want to read. I put them in the order I want to read them, and then I put in the number of pages per book. And I have some formulas built in that will tell you how many books you need, or how many pages actually you need to read per day to get through all the books on your list for that year. I find that to be one of the more helpful things, to know that number, because then I know, okay, if I want to read a certain number of books, I can't view it as books per week because some books are bigger than others. But if I can view it as pages, then I know, hey, I just need to be at this number of pages per day, and I'll get through all these books this year. So feel free to download those. I hope you use it. It's been a helpful tool to me, so I just want to share that with you guys as well. So until next week, or in a couple weeks, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.